So, as we commence our political season, I thought I would bring up a few things that we hear in our political discourse that do not make any sense, or that maybe we haven't thought about, as far as we often hear the term speaking out of both sides of your mouth, and sometimes it seems like we can't even put a finger on what it is that was said that doesn't quite seem to make sense. We just know it doesn't quite jive with, what is logical. So, one of my favorite authors of all time is C.S. Lewis. And I really like his writings because he comes back to logic. And in even some of the novels that he wrote, he would have his characters say things like, about the children, and this was in the 50s. My, what do they teach them in these schools? Because he was just taken aback at how, as our culture progresses, that there seems to be sometimes less and less logical thought as the generations progress. So back in those good old days, and I say good old days because they're far enough back that we maybe don't remember all the challenges that the good old days actually presented us with. But both public and private schools used to teach courses on logic. Students were taught critical thinking skills, and some of these skills, as I said before, I fear have almost been lost on this generation. Any good logic course from days of yore would focus a good portion of their time on logical fallacies. So what is a logical fallacy? Fallacies are statements or arguments that sound reasonable or true, but are actually flawed or dishonest. As the political season approaches, watch carefully and you'll see that our discourse, again, is littered with all types of logical fallacies. A good example of a logical fallacy heard in our political debate is called the either-or fallacy, or called sometimes the excluded middle fallacy. This fallacy occurs when a speaker builds an argument upon the assumption that there are only two possible outcomes, when actually there could be several or even more. An example of a fallacy would be a statement like this: either we go to war with Canada, or else Canada will eventually grow in population and overwhelm the United States. A statement could seem a little far-fetched, knowing the nature of Canadians. But do you remember a statement from the past decade that said, either you are with us or you're with the terrorists? And to think I actually voted for the guy. So another example of logical fallacies in political discourse. Remember a couple of weeks ago we were talking about the healthcare debate. Remember how I asked to break with protocol so I could deliver a rebuttal to one of our members' opinion that the federal health care was good? Well, I actually used a logical fallacy in my argument. And I don't know if you could put your finger on it, but the fallacy that I used is called the slippery slope fallacy, or the camel's nose fallacy. It's a non sequitur in which the speaker argues that once the first step is undertaken, a second or third step will inevitably follow. Much like the way one step on a slippery incline will cause a person to fall and slide all the way to the bottom. The reason it would be called the camel's nose fallacy is the idea that if it's cold outside and you allow the camel to poke his nose into your tent, pretty soon the neck will be in, and then the shoulders, and then the camel goes down inside the tent. So one of my arguments against the healthcare law was that if we allowed the federal government the power to force us to buy health insurance, I argued that once they get that power, what else will they force us to buy next? It's not necessarily inevitable that the feds will force us to buy anything. Likely, in my view, but it's a logical fallacy nonetheless. So as you can see, I was arguing for that slippery slope. Well, if we allow them to do this, then what will they do that follows? So how about another example, and this is one of the big ones in our political discourse, is in Latin, it's called the logical fallacy of argumentum ad hominem, or personal attacks. This is saying something like, how could this idea be any good? Al Franken came up with that one, and we all know, about Al Franken. Or how about, are you kidding? That law couldn't be any good. Rush Limbaugh originally suggested it. Arguments like these are false because the personal character of an individual is logically irrelevant to the truth or falseness of the argument itself. And we see that all over the place when people present ideas. It's like, well, you come from here, or... Another one that's very closely tied to this is called the genetic fallacy. The genetic fallacy is a claim that an idea, product, or person must be untrustworthy because of its racial, geographic, or ethnic origin. That car can't be any good. It was made in Korea. Well, where it was made has nothing to do with how it was made necessarily, but we can often generalize. Or, why should I be listening to her? She's a liberal, and we all know how the liberals are bankrupt in California. It's that generalization of groups of people that have nothing to do with how the truth or veracity of an argument. So, the objective for me, and I think for all of us, of attending Toastmasters is in part to become better thinkers and better speakers. To accomplish this, it's imperative that we speak and think in logic and truth, not fallacy or error. All through time, those who speak truth have been held in high esteem, because truth is eternal. Truth doesn't appear or disappear based on votes or based on what people think. It's just there. So let us therefore strive for truth in thought and word as we all become better Toastmasters. Thank you.
Okay, remember to make some comments for Ray on the yellow sheet.
What's the title?
And at this point,
Logical fallacies.
I'd like to introduce our second speaker. That's Sharon Baroda. And Sharon's going to be speaking today from her Advanced Communicator Manual on resources, and the topic of her talk, title of her talk is Green Sand Beach. What then? And this will